Hey YouTube, Joyboy here. So today I want to talk about Sanji. Now there's a lot of really pessimistic people in the community when it comes to the topic of Sanji because it's been a really long time since we've seen Sanji actually do something combat-wise that really impacted the story in a very long time. And so with that being said, I think that some of these comments are troll comments. Some of these people are just joking. But the general lack of love for Sanji recently is honestly disturbing. So much so that I decided to make this video. This is not going to be a mind-blowing video for a lot of people or a ground-breaking one, but I think it's one that is necessary. So without further ado, let's give a little bit of love to Sanji. This is the year of Sanji after all. But before we actually get into what I think is going to happen in the future with Sanji, let's focus on the past and the reason why people are really hating on Sanji. The last time that I felt genuinely wowed by a one-on-one fight with Sanji happened all the way back in chapter 416 when he fought Jabra of CP9 and first revealed his technique, Diable Jambe. That was the last time that I truly felt wowed in a one-on-one fight, over 400 chapters ago. After this point, it just seemed to go downhill. The next major arc after the Enies Lobbies arc was the Thriller Bark arc, and in that arc, Sanji did get a one-on-one fight with Absalom, and he ended up victorious in this fight, and Absalom used some dirty tactics, which honestly Sanji was pretty impressive in overcoming, but I never really got the impression that Absalom was quite the force that Jabra was at the time in the story, and that Sanji had an easier time beating him than he would have against Jabra, just based on physical strength alone. This is debatable, but still, I didn't have the wow factor that I had when he beat Jabra, the same that when he beat Absalom. But he was still pretty impressive in general in this arc because he also joined in later in the tag team effort to take on the zombie Oars with Luffy's shadow. Then again, at the end of this arc, he was one of the two Straw Hats still standing, him and Zoro. And while Zoro got to really face off against Kuma and then take on all the damage, being sort of selected as the one who would inherit all of Luffy's damage, I still was favorably impressed by Sanji. But again, this was the Thriller Bark arc, many chapters ago. Since the end of the Thriller Bark arc, chapter 490, since that point in time, there has really been so little love for Sanji in the story, from a one-on-one combat perspective. And let's focus on the next major arc after Thriller Bark, which was the Shibondi Archipelago arc. And in that arc, the entire Straw Hats were defeated. Sanji was able to take on a pacifista with the help of Zoro and Luffy, and they did defeat it, but ultimately this arc was just the defeat arc. That's what it was. No major one-on-ones for Sanji, and no major wins. And this ultimately led into the 2-year time skip, where the Straw Hats were separated and got stronger. Sanji is no exception, he got stronger. But compare what we've seen with Sanji from what we've seen with Luffy and Zoro, and it just doesn't add up. We'll start with the Fishman Island arc. In this arc, Sanji had a 2-on-1 opponent with Waratsumi in a battle that really I don't even remember how it went down. It just wasn't big enough to even remember. In an arc where all the Straw Hats got one-on-one opponents, Sanji didn't. But granted, there was really no opponent worthy of anyone's time in this arc. But still, no love for Sanji in this particular arc, facing off against somebody really worthy of his New World strength. So let's actually test Sanji's power level. In the next arc, in the Punk Hazard arc, he actually went up against one of the top tier fighters in that arc, Virgo. And while he put up a decent fight against Virgo, Virgo essentially broke his leg, and Sanji definitely didn't beat him. And so Sanji had an opportunity to shine in the story, and it never came to be. But surely after 200 chapters, Oda would finally give Sanji his moment. We head into the Dressrosa arc, and Sanji faced no one. Well, no one until he faced off against Doflamingo, who we knew was going to be Luffy and or Law's final opponent in this arc, or both. And so there's just no way that Sanji is going to beat Doflamingo. We already knew this. And so it came to be no surprise when Doflamingo immobilized Sanji and then was about to deal what appeared to be pretty much a final blow on Sanji before he was saved by Law, and then due to plot purposes removed from the Dressrosa arc. Meanwhile, Luffy and Zoro continued to increase the gap, at least perceived gap, between themselves and Sanji. Zoro completely just dismantled Pika. And then Luffy, of course, revealed Gear 4th and its overpoweredness, while Sanji was not even in the story. And so Sanji fans are kept waiting again. But we knew that Sanji would have to play some role, right? He's gotta have his moment. And so after the Dressrosa arc, Sanji and half of the Straw Hat crew head alone to Zou, and we know that they encountered the Big Mom Pirates. Maybe Sanji did something amazing during this time that we didn't get to see for many chapters. And we finally do get to see it, and Sanji is amazing, but not in a one-on-one fight, more of a gang fight in which they didn't actually defeat anyone, they just ran away. And when the rest of the Straw Hats finally arrive on Zou, and we wait to find out what actually happened there, we find out that Sanji is no longer present on that island. He had left, captured by the Big Mom Pirates, to attend a wedding that he did not want to participate in on Whole Cake Island. But then Ichiro Oda drops a bomb. He reveals in an interview that this is in fact the year of Sanji, and we're heading towards the Save Sanji arc, and we're sure Sanji is going to do something spectacular. And so we get to the Whole Cake Island arc, and Sanji has his moments. It's revealed off panel that he defeated his brother Yanji, or at least knocked his head in, and that guy did not beat Sanji. But we didn't actually get to see it, so it's really hard to hype over this fight. But in the last couple chapters, we actually do get to see some fights with Sanji. Sanji versus Judge and Sanji versus Niji. And in both fights, it's very clear that Sanji didn't win, and you could almost say that Sanji straight up lost. And at this moment, many people are starting to wonder, is this the year of Sanji in terms of Sanji actually showing us some awesome one-on-one battle? Or is this the year of Sanji just because we're getting to see more of Sanji's backstory and his family? I am absolutely sure that it's not. I am positive that this is the arc in which Sanji finally, after, as I said earlier, over 400 chapters of just nothing really to really get behind him for, this will be the arc which will bring back Sanji fans and remind them why he's part of the Monster Trio. I honestly think Oda has been saving Sanji and all of his post-time skip new moves and powers for this moment. But before I can really explain this, I would have to go back. And let's go back to some of these fights that he's lost and how I see Oda taking the story and why exactly he chose for Sanji to intervene and ultimately lose. And let's start with Virgo and Sanji's fight against him. And first off, I think that it should have been obvious to everyone that Sanji couldn't have been the person to take on Virgo directly, especially after it was revealed with Virgo's direct history with Law. Virgo was the man responsible for the death of Law's really inspiration and mentor in Corazon. Without Virgo, Corazon never dies, and Law does not have his feelings of just vengeful hate against Doflamingo and his family for the next, however long it was, 10, 20 years. So regardless of who was stronger, Virgo or Sanji, Sanji couldn't be the one to beat him, and that's why Sanji intervened and saved all the Marines, specifically saved Tashigi. But that's all that Oda would allow him to do. Oda was not going to allow him to beat Virgo, and that's why we see that Virgo ran off and that fight was left unfinished. And in the Dressrosa arc, Oda didn't allow Sanji the opportunity to showcase his skills. Specifically, Sanji had no one-on-one opponent aside from Doflamingo, who we knew wasn't going to be defeated at the hands of Sanji. And so here, I think, is direct evidence towards Oda purposefully removing him from the story, removing him from the possibility of having an epic fight, just for the purposes of not allowing us to see what he can really do. The same applies to the fight versus Virgo. Sanji was facing off against Virgo with not really any special techniques or new techniques whatsoever, and we were finally getting to the point where we would expect that if Sanji was going to defeat Virgo, that he would reveal something new, and then abruptly that fight ends, Virgo leaves, the gas comes into the building, and so Sanji again is not allowed the opportunity to show us anything that he learned during the time skip. And so now let's go into his fights versus the Vinsmoke, specifically his fights versus Judge Vinsmoke and Niji. And so both of those appear on the surface as clear losses, but I'm not sure that we should take them as such. And his fight versus Judge, specifically, he's fighting against Judge. Judge seems to have the upper hand, but before Sanji is really allowed to show us anything new, Judge uses his wall technique, and a fodder comes in the middle of their fight. Judge impales him and then sends Sanji flying. We don't actually get to see the rest of this fight, but I think that Sanji knew at this point in time that he could not go all out against his father without sacrificing all of the pawns, because Judge was willing to do that. Again, at the very least, Oda gives us a reason to doubt the validity of the fight, which I think is interesting given his history of doing this at this point. There's definitely a debate to be had on whether Sanji would actually defeat Judge if Judge didn't use the wall technique and sacrifice his fodders, and that alone is enough for me. And in the fight versus Niji, the same exact thing happens. Oda is not allowing Sanji to go all out, as Sanji was apparently kicking his brother's ass. Ichiji then reminds him that if he fights his brothers, that it's possible that he might lose Owner Zeph. And he clearly reacted to this information, showing that it affected him, and then afterwards it was no surprise that Niji won the battle. They basically took away Sanji's ability to fight back. So who's stronger, Niji or Sanji? I don't really think that we can say at this moment, but I think that it is highly important that Oda isn't allowing him to try. And I don't think it any coincidence that the one time in which Sanji supposedly was allowed to go all out since this point in the story, in its fight versus Yonji, that was off panel. There's a reason for that. Sanji has more to show us Oda isn't allowing us to see. So with all this being said, this is the year of Sanji. I think it's very clear based on what Oda is doing with him in the story that Sanji is stronger than he's been shown to be. And what perfect time would it be for Sanji to showcase all of his post time skip new moves than in an epic confrontation with his family who he despises. And I think the person in which he will show off all of his new techniques will be Ichiji. This was actually brought up to me by SSJ22 Terrace, who is a regular commenter, who noticed something interesting of chapter 840. And so we get to see the competition between all the Vinsmokes. And it's interesting that the person who comes out number one in every single one of these competitions by far is Ichiji. And he is well ahead of Niji and Yonji, who are actually shown to be comparable. And so I think that from this we can gather pretty roughly that Niji and Yonji are of similar strength, with Niji being slightly stronger. And then Ichiji is worlds ahead of them. And so I think that we can take Sanji as being stronger than Yonji, given that it seems as though he beat him, even though we didn't get to see the fight and it was off panel. And so if Sanji can beat Yonji, I believe Sanji could beat Niji. I think the only reason Niji won that battle was because Zeph's death was brought up mid-fight. But when it comes to Ichiji, I think that Sanji is going to be of a similar strength to Ichiji, and that this fight will really test him. And this will be the moment where we actually get to see what Sanji is capable of. The first major one-on-one battle Sanji will have had for at least 300 chapters, and in my opinion, over 400. I honestly think at this point we can look at it as foreshadowing by omission. We've seen Sanji now, or heard of Sanji facing off against every single major member of the Vinsmoke family, except for Reiju, who is pretty much now confirmed to be a friend, and Ichiji. I think this foreshadows the idea that Ichiji is the one that Sanji will ultimately go all out against. But of course, Judge Vinsmoke is still a possibility. However, at this point, I'm wondering if Judge is really strong enough to test Sanji. I've stated in this video that I think Sanji has more to show us that Oda has been saving. And so in the fight versus Judge, Sanji seemed to be at the very least very near the power of Judge, if Judge showed at least most of his cards. But we can see that Judge was able to land hits on Sanji, but he didn't actually do any damage to him. And then of course, if Sanji had been holding back, this puts into question the idea that Judge is actually a viable opponent for him if Sanji were to go all out. So that's why I prefer Ichiji. So yeah guys, again, nothing too out of the box with this video. I just felt like it was necessary and honestly wanted to devote an entire video to describing how I think that Sanji is not being overlooked, he's just being saved. And so with that being said, I want to hear your thoughts about this video. Let me know what you think, let me know if you agree or if you disagree and why. Share your thoughts, subscribe if you haven't, and as always dudes, have a wonderful day.